I think that's right. You know, Carl Jung, he thought about the story of the Passion as an archetypal tragedy. And here's what he meant by that. So imagine that you took all the tragedies that were ever written and you distilled them so that you got the ultimate tragedy. Because the fact that you can identify a bunch of different stories as tragic means they have something in common, right? And so you could imagine you could pull out the central pattern of tragedy, and we could flesh out some of what that might be. Like, it's tragic when something bad happens to someone. Well, what if they deserve it? Okay, well then it's not so tragic. It still might have an element of tragedy, but it's really tragic if something really terrible happens to someone who clearly doesn't deserve it. So what's the most tragic story? Well, it's the worst possible thing happening to the person who least deserves it. Well, that's core to the Passion story, that's for sure, right? Because not only is Christ innocent, he's not merely innocent. He's also good, and not just good. He's as good as it gets. And yet, his life is the tragedy of the Passion is the worst of all possible punishments visited upon the least deserving person. But it's way worse than that. That just barely begins to scrape the surface, because it's torture, and a terrible torture, because the Romans designed crucifixion to be a terrible torture, like consciously. And so it's tragedy at the hands of your fellow man, and your fellow man motivated by the spirit of Cain in the most fundamental sense. How can I inflict the most misery possible in the shortest period of time, let's say, subject to that, at a young age, with foreknowledge, as a consequence of betrayal by your best friend, at the hands of a mob of your own people who are simultaneously under the thumb of a tyranny that's part and parcel of what's persecuting you, who persecute you knowing you're innocent, not just innocent, but also good, and who choose to punish you instead of punishing someone they know to be criminal. It's all of that. It's like the sum total of all possible fears. And I think that's right. And it's so interesting to me that psychologically, that not speaking religiously to the degree that that's possible when speaking about such things, is that our culture has put at its center an archetypal tragedy. It's as if we're attempting to inoculate ourselves against the catastrophe of life. But what's also so fascinating about the story of the Passion is that the crucifixion is not the end of the story.